Welcome back to my watery grave, where we examine the truly horrific and mysterious stories from across the globe at the fine midnight hour. It was almost sunset this evening when I last saw any part of the Great Barrier Reef. I'm finally leaving Australia after a eventful week. I'm almost sad to see it go. It has a rich and diverse flora and fauna, as well as some drastic climates. The reef alone can house thousands of species, but it has seen better days. Years of damage have bleached it, leaving large swaths of it uninhabitable. It's a shame, really, as the marine life it sustains is a beautiful and necessary aspect of an otherwise unforgiving ocean. I met something during my visit to Australia that makes me feel slightly better about the situation, however. I'm not sure if I can really expect anything that happens on my adventures. It seems that no matter what I assume will happen, things will never turn out that way. But this is certainly the case for this one. Enough of my ramblings. Let's get into the story. Sailing down from Hong Kong, I knew of some spots I'd like to see, but decided it didn't really matter where I docked the lantern. I docked in a place called Port Douglas. It's a fine place in Queensland, but I knew that this isn't where I was going to find what I was looking for. I ordered a rental car and headed for one more stop before going more inland. I was hungry and wanted something to eat before climbing a mountain. I stopped at a small bar on the way outside of town. There was nothing fancy or special about it. I sat at a table and looked up at the TVs on the wall. They have sports or news playing. Personally, I couldn't care about either. The waitress walks over and hands me a menu. I think about how a good burger with fries sounds just before being told that there is a local beef shortage and there aren't any burgers. Figures that would happen. It's not a big deal, as I just ordered a barramundi. I sat for a bit while my food is prepared, watching the patrons as they come and go. I was hoping that I'd be lucky enough to stumble across an old drunkard or someone who seemed to have an interesting story. There were no such people, sadly. Nevertheless, the fish arrived and I began to eat. The fish was tender and juicy, and the fries were seasoned well. After I finished my meal, I headed off for my first stop. Black Mountain, originally and preferably called Kalkahaka to the Aboriginal people, was top of my list to visit. This interesting place still confuses people today. It is commonly thought to be an evil place with supernatural events occurring and numerous unexplained disappearances. Accounts of random lights, vibrations, and weird sounds and shadow people are all normal and common reported things. The landform and surrounding area are made up of large black granite boulders towering on top of each other to form an ominous black mound jutting up from the earth. The size is truly something to behold, as boulders as big as small houses are still dwarfed in comparison to the mountain. The lack of one unified piece of granite also provides ample crevices to explore into and makes it seem as if the structure itself is living as the rocks shift over its massive slope. It was about a 3-hour drive from here to the beast, and already I could feel the chills coming from it. When I arrived at the landform, I knew it from the second stepping out of the car that there was something off about this place. Nothing overt was wrong. In fact, it seemed like an average national park. There were a few people there also enjoying the sights and reading the plaques. It was about mid-afternoon and the sun was high in the sky. The heat was more than what I preferred, but the day wasn't getting any younger, and I had a mountain to investigate. I grabbed my backpack from the car and started my hike. The terrain wasn't rough to navigate. When you live your life on a small boat in the middle of the rolling ocean, you get used to walking on unstable ground. After a few minutes of walking down from the parking lot, I arrived at the base of the monolith. I didn't necessarily know where to begin, or what to do to stir up any paranormal activity, so I figured I'd just walk around exploring it and wait for whatever happens. Hours pass as I traverse the mountain. Nothing but black rocks surround me. I'm about halfway up the beast and have walked all around to the opposite side. I hadn't seen anything unusual, but there is a feeling in the air, and it grows in intensity as I get closer to the center. I feel an almost vibration in the rocks. I sat down and began to watch the sun as it started to wane in the sky. A cool breeze picked up slightly, and I thought to myself maybe this was going to be the start of something interesting. I laid back, trying my hardest to find the most comfortable rocks to rest on in the massive boulder field. I continued to wait, listening and scanning the horizon for any unnatural entities. As it continued to get darker, I realized it might be best to head back. Evil spirits aren't the only thing that can harm me out here. Traversing these black massive rocks in the darkness certainly seems like a bad place to be. Slowly making my way, I noticed how much this place has changed. The peaceful serenity of the sun making the landscape glow a warm yellow has now been replaced by an overwhelming heaviness. The blackness is oppressive, and as I got closer to the car, it got more and more difficult to move. It was almost as if the mountain wasn't wanting me to leave. It was pulling me back to it. Luckily, I made it back to the car. Sitting in the driver's seat, I looked into the empty void. I couldn't distinguish any specific landmarks or where the sky met the ground. Just blackness. I knew, though, that it was still out there right in front of me. That pile of rocks may be invisible right now in the cover of darkness, but I feel its presence looming not so far away. I realized I hadn't thought at all about where I was going to sleep tonight, seeing as it was already well into the night, and I would still have to drive to find a place to stay. I decided to just recline the seat as far back as I could and tried to get comfortable. I can't say it was rather restful sleep, but it definitely beat the rocks. I woke up the next morning to the sun shining in my eyes from the mirror. Admittedly, I was quite slow to get up. The hike yesterday must have really taken a lot out of me. It's like this place was purposely draining my energy. I leaned the seat up slowly, watching as the rocks rise up from behind my dashboard, prominently taking up the horizon when I'm fully upright. I just looked at it for several minutes, scanning every inch of it. The mountain was going to win this staring contest, however, as my gut decided to put in its 2 cents. The gargle of my famished stomach was now my main concern. I know this place is hiding something. What it is, I'll have to find out another time. I had a feeling it wasn't ready to show me what it had in store. Maybe I wasn't ready. Whichever it is, it seemed that this is going to continue for another day. I had another place I had to visit anyway, and coming in first was any place that had food. I started the car and the motor revved to life as I drove out of the park. I drove several miles back south until I came across a small town. I parked in front of the restaurant and made my way inside. I knew I probably looked really rough from the night before, but I was happily greeted and offered a seat. The waiter came over and began to go over the specials they had. The salad he described sounded very nice and refreshing. I, however, was looking for something more substantial and greasier. He said he'd suggest a pizza then. He would have said to get their burger, but just like the pub outside Port Douglas, they too were short on beef. I asked him why, and he said that the local ranchers kept losing cattle, and they could only afford to sell to the higher-end restaurants. Hearing of cows disappearing randomly will always intrigue me. I like cows. They're tasty and they can be pretty cute, but they aren't that smart, and so whenever they keep going missing, usually isn't the cows making a daring escape. I ate my pizza while thinking about it. I had other places I could go, but there was something that made me want to check this out. And besides, randomly stumbling into mysteries has worked out so far. I finished my food and paid. I guess I was now on my way further inland to talk to some ranchers. I decided best to just pick the worst looking road and continue on until I see cows. After about an hour of driving, I started to get nervous. I realized I know nothing about how Australians raise cattle. Happily, as I crest a bumpy hill, I looked to my left and saw some cows trotting away from the fence towards a large golf cart. I saw a pole in for the field, and I got out. I walked up to the gate and waited for the golf cart to make its way back out. It wasn't long as the man operating it saw me and finished dumping a bucket of mineral. He swung around and asked if I needed anything. I explained I was interested in the local cattle disappearances and asked if he had any. He shut off the golf cart and asked what I wanted to know. I told him I'm interested in mysteries. He somewhat chuckled at my comment and responded that he knew what was happening to the cattle. When I asked what it was, he got quieter. He leaned over more and told me he thought it was a small group of Aboriginal people camped nearby. Feeling now that I might be dealing with a racist rancher, I asked him why he thought that. He explained that after his second cow went missing, he set up some cameras around his fence line. The fifth cow had gone missing, and he finally caught something. He said he saw 3 men from the nearby tribe sneaking around the fence in the middle of the night before the cow went missing. I was starting to believe him until I asked him why he thought that they were taking them. He said that they were probably just too dumb to understand they don't own this land anymore. So, I guess I was dealing with a racist. I ended the conversation and got back on the road. I decided that I was going to still talk to some of the Aboriginal people in the area, though. Not because I care if they steal cows from a piece of shit, or even if I think they did it, but I figured they might know what's going on. I traveled down the bumpy road, now not on the lookout for cows, but for small dilapidated homes. The tribes have moved on from their hut living from ages before, and now live in squalor on the outskirts of town. Many are unemployed or work hard as laborers for little money. It's an absolute disgrace to see how these people were treated and how their government has failed them. I can't say that's unusual, unfortunately. All around the world you see it. Once again, though, this rough road proves resourceful, as a handful of miles down the road, what looked like mobile homes emerged from the horizon. I was fortunate to find them as quick as I did. The sun was once again waning in the sky, and it would have made it considerably more difficult to find anyone who wanted to help. As I approached the houses, I could see some kids playing outside. I turned into the makeshift driveway and turned off the car. The children stopped playing, and one called for their dad. I got out of the car and stood next to the door as the father came out. He certainly seemed hesitant when he saw me. He asked who I was and what I was doing here. As reassuringly as I could, I expressed my interest in the recent missing cattle. Immediately after the mention of the missing cows, though, the father's mood changed from cautious to more defensive and angrier. He interrupted me and said that he knew nothing of it and that I needed to leave. Certainly not a poker player, this man. I tried to reassure him that I wasn't hired by anyone or wasn't here to arrest him. I told him I met a racist rancher up the road and wanted to hear what he thought about it. He still didn't trust me, I could tell, but after a few minutes of silence, he broke. He quickly spoke about how their neighbor just hates them and would blame the drought on his people too if he could. He said he knew nothing of what he speaks and the cows were probably eaten by dingoes. I knew the man spoke the truth of his awful neighbor, but not of the cows. I agreed that the rancher was a dick. but I prodded a little bit more. I informed him that he said he had a video of a couple people sneaking around his fence line. A look of worry crosses the father's face. I knew then for sure he was involved. He only responded that the rancher must be lying. I nodded my head without breaking eye contact. I told the father that it's a shame it wasn't him. It seemed like some shithead was getting what was coming to him. That certainly eased the tension as he laughed and agreed. I asked why he thought that someone would take the cows. If someone was, however, ending it with a wink. Tension was back. More reserved again. The man said that even if he did know, I probably wouldn't understand if I was told. I only replied with "try me." He told me I didn't know what I was getting myself into, and it's better to just not involve myself. Now that the tiptoeing was done, I figured I'd just explain myself more fully. I told him I know he's involved, and that I want to see why and how they get the cows. I told him I want to know what they do with them, because I didn't think they were eating hundreds of pounds of beef every couple of days. Sternly saying no, he told me I'm not allowed. Said it was too dangerous and he didn't know how it would react. That piqued my interest. I told him I was going and asked what it was. He rebutted that I wasn't coming and that I wouldn't comprehend what it was, or even believe him if he told me. I only said that he'd be surprised, and half a minute of silence passed until the father caved. He told me he couldn't stop me from coming, but to not expect help from them. That was fine with me. He turned away and walked towards the house. He called to others saying that they were going to leave at sundown. I waited by the car until it got dark, and I saw a small group of 3 people leave through the back door of their houses. I started after them into the void, once again traversing the Australian outback in the dead of night. This terrain was much less hazardous than the boulder field before, though. It wasn't much trouble to slowly pursue the group. We headed into the direction of the nearby rancher. An hour ticked by as we silently made it to the fence line. A group of cows were only a little down the way, and it seemed like the perfect time to steal one. I stayed back as I watched this 3-man team work with quick precision to destroy the fence, lead a cow out, and then fix the fence again. It was obvious they had experience. In just as little time as it took for them to get in, they were out, and we were now on our way with a cow companion. We left in the direction away from both the ranch and the tribe's houses, heading deeper into the middle of the dusty landscape. I walked for hours. The squad ahead of me would occasionally talk amongst themselves, and the cow would moo sometimes, but other than that, absolute silence. We were truly in the middle of nowhere. I was starting to wonder how much longer we would be walking. We were miles from any road or any other sign of life when the horizon started to glow a slight blue. It grew in strength as we made our way closer. We crested the top of a cliff, and I looked down into the basin, the bottom of which lied a blue pool of water. This pond was decently sized, being an ovalish shape about a few hundred meters diameter. The water was glowing and was the source of the mysteriously colored horizon. We made our way down the cliff and approached the lake slowly. We were within 50 feet of the water's edge when the Aboriginal group let go of the cow's lead and in unison started to run away from the pond. I looked over and the father looked back and yelled that it would be best if I ran too. I took his advice and started to back up when the ground started to shake violently. It was too late, and I knew that. I stood frozen as the spirit burst from the water. It was huge. It glowed in a myriad of intricate patterns all over its body, slowly changing from color to color. I was engulfed in its light as the bioluminescent beast breached the water. It used manta ray-like wings to hold its body high into the air. The wings smashed on either side of me, and it looked down at me with the face of an orca. Without looking away from me, one of its many octopus-like tentacles emerged from the pond's surface from behind it to grab the cow and drop it directly into its mouth. I felt as if I was about to be eaten too until it spoke. It filled my mind and deafened every other noise. I wasn't sure whether it spoke to me in my brain or out loud. Nevertheless, another tentacle swung around and picked me up, raising me to eye level with it. I was at least 20 feet in the air when it spoke to me again. I was asked who I was and what I was doing here. It said it didn't recognize me. I tried explaining what I was there for, but before I could even finish my name, it had told me it already knew who I was. After a few seconds that felt like an eternity, it set me down and spoke again. It was nice to be on the ground, but I still wasn't safe. It told me this matter wasn't my concern. I asked what the matter was. It lowered its face down directly in front of me yet again. The voice boomed loudly in my skull. It told me it was helping this landscape, and if I won't leave, I'll go the way of the cow. I knew I didn't have to speak to give my answer. I just slowly backed up. The being exhaled loudly and turned as it dived back down into its watery home, still glowing under the shimmering surface. When I had made it back to the father, he just smiled and shook his head and continued back to his home. My look of horrified fascination must have been pretty plainly printed on my face as I asked him questions. I said I figured it was a nature spirit, but what did he mean he was helping the landscape by eating cows? The man said it was too young to make any drastic changes. That's why they feed it so much. It's not just them either. It's other tribes in the area also bringing it food. He said that they were trying to make it grow as big as they can, so it can save their land. Fires, droughts, and drastic losses of plant and animal life are hurting the beautiful continent, and this was the only way for them to save it. When it gets old enough, the power it will possess could absorb the coral bleaching or provide moisture to the desert. We walked back the rest of the way in silence, as I imagined what this desert would look like, with lush forests and diverse animals calling it home. As we came across the houses, lights started to crest the horizon. The other tribesmen walked into their respective homes to join their families. The only one that didn't was the father. He walked me to my car and told me he hopes I understand. I thanked him for this trip. I've never seen a nature spirit in person before, and I'm happy to do anything that I can to help their cause. We shook hands and I got into the car. I drove down the same bumpy road I came from earlier the day before. I was almost done in Australia and was on my way back to my ship, but there was one more stop I had to make. I pulled up to the spot where I had talked to the rancher, put the car in park and shut off the lights. I reached into my backpack and pulled out some small bolt cutters. I got out and walked to the fence and made sure that there was a nice big hole for any curious cow to escape. And now I can leave. I drove in bliss, getting lost in thought as the road noise droned in my ears. Hours fly by, and I'm rolling into Port Douglas around lunchtime. I stop one more time in that small pub outside town to unwind and eat some food. The waiter walks up and asks if I know what I want. I order the fish tacos, smiling as I see a sign on the bar stating they don't have any beef. I finished up and got back to the harbor. I boarded my ship and fell asleep. I still had the spot for the rest of the day, and almost getting eaten by a lake monster really takes it out of you. I woke up early in the evening and set sail on my way to deeper waters. And here we are now, back to the present. I wish I could talk to that beautiful monster more. Maybe someday later when it doesn't have so much on its plate. I'll search for new adventures to embark on in the meantime, though. I'll end the episode tonight with this. Care about all living things around you. You never know how it can affect the larger world around you. Good night, ladies and gentlemen. Stay vigilant. There are dark forces among us.